Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And with this one, I will be bringing you my Dragonflight Melee DPS PvP tier list. We're going to be talking about all of the melee DPS specializations and power ranking them at this current moment in the Dragonflight beta. We are just a few weeks away from the launch, so these types of videos are a good way for you to get some sort of idea of how the specialization you may be interested in playing is doing and how it's going to interact with other specializations. I have over hundreds of games now played on the Dragonflight beta. I'd say probably hundreds of hours logged of watching pro players playing these specializations to try and give you the best idea of where they are at. Do note that this is based on the Dragonflight beta, not the pre-patch at all. We're not talking about pre-patch. We're talking about the next expansion when all the Shadowlands covenants are away and gone and dispensed with. And also note that changes are potentially ongoing. So if you want to stay up to date with how the classes are ranking, how they're feeling, how fun are they, and making sure that you're getting the best experience for yourself, do hit the subscribe button, as I am aiming to be a resource for that reason. So let's get started with the tier list here. The first specialization is Arms Warrior. This spec was kind of the kingpin of Shadowlands for a large majority of it, but it has honestly fallen from grace here moving into Dragonflight. Despite getting access to Impending Victory, despite getting access to Double Time, Stormbolt, Short Heroic Leap cooldown, you can get all of these things simultaneously. It's only really got one thing going for it, which is a Skull Splitter kind of burst damage build. But in the current meta with the 40% stamina buff, it's really struggling. Any spec that's only focused on burst damage is going to have a hard time executing on kill windows within that given avenue. So its damage is in an all right position, but honestly, even with the mobility changes and survivability from Impending Victory, its survivability is the lowest of any specialization right now. I'd say that you're either in the same position you were at the end of Shadowlands, if not maybe a bit worse, honestly, even despite getting so many things added to your kit. I don't know if there's like some PP modifiers they put in there preemptively because everyone was freaking out about how insane it was, because it did seem insane. But how it's playing out now, I'd say that Arms Warrior is a struggle bus in PvP. For Assassination Rogue, this is a specialization that does a huge amount of single target burst damage, enough that it can actually cut through the 40% stamina buff on a lot of classes, ignoring maybe the ones that are going to be in S tier here. Its survivability, again, is going to be the main holding back point, and this is mostly because there are other specs in the game that are like borderlining invincibility, and you're going to notice that when you're playing Assassination Rogue, when you're getting run down in these classes that are invincible, you're going to have a tough time. So I'd say it's very similar spot to where it was in terms of performance for Shadowlands, where heavy hitting, burst damage, lockdown with kidney shots, but you're going to feel a bit squishy. I would definitely say that it is better than Arms Warrior, though, because it has so much burst damage that it can cut through even some of the best specializations, but survivability is definitely going to hold it back. Enhancement Shaman, this is a spec that just got a 25% damage nerf. You're still bringing a lot of hybrid healing and support, but the best classes in the game don't really need that. They already do enough healing on their own, so you're not in too good of a spot there. Also, your main selling point was burst damage with Elemental Blast with the 40% stamina increase. Killing in that window is a little bit tougher. It's still possible, similar to the Assassination Rogue, but consistent damage on it I don't think is high enough really to start to have any sort of significant impact, and it's really locked into one specific build at the moment competitively. So for me, it's coming in about the middle place here. I am talking mostly about solo queue PvP here when I'm analyzing these classes, because that's the only data we've had to really gather for these, with maybe a little bit of insight into possible synergies for other classes. Something else for enhancement is that it's a spec that doesn't really synergize with anything other than Warrior, so you might struggle in ranked solo queue when you don't get lobbies that have Warriors, and with Arms Warrior being down here, that's likely to be the case. Feral Druid does a surprising amount of cleave damage. They definitely nailed the bleed fantasy on Feral Druid for this expansion. It looks like a lot of fun and a blast. Has really good survivability, same type of healing as enhancement without the drawback of mana, because you're just going to be using Predatory Swiftness procs. And with some of the new Druid talents that came through, you can accumulate your damage into a big regrowth and get these massive recovery windows. It's really hard for me to say whether or not you're as good as the best classes as Feral Druid right now. I just feel like you don't synergize as effectively as the classes that I'm likely going to be putting on S tier, and I think that that's probably the one point that holds you back a bit here. Is synergy with other classes. Like Feral has generally been very limited to something like only with hunters, and maybe with mages, and mages are not doing too hot right now. So I think its synergy with other classes is the main reason that I'm not going to put it onto S tier, even though its damage is really high, personal survivability is really high, healing for teammates is really high, great utility and crowd control for everybody else. It's just the synergy with other specs, even with it having mortal wounds, it's kind of an outlier that usually fits within a niche, and I think that's still the case. Frosty K, I was just recently watching Mez playing Frosty K. His opinions of it seem to be that it's about average. It's not going to be kind of like cusping over into the S tier category here. It seems to be functioning as like a 1-minute burst damage spec, which is not too great when you've got 40% increased stamina pools. So you're gonna have a tough time cutting through that burst window. Your survivability is really high though, with things like getting blood DK talents that are gonna make you tanky when you get low HP, Death Strike scaling with percent healing. So you're definitely a durable target. Do bring in massive burst damage. Again, much like Feral and Enhancement, synergy problems, right? You're kind of a cleave type of DPS. So you want to stack enemies together, burst them down. Not every class in the game wants to do that. So if you get them, you might have a bit of a tough time, but there are some that do. And because there's a lot of powerful melee DPS, Frost does tend to do well into those classes because it can group them up. That I think it could work. Might struggle with some of the Warlocks. So for me, I think it's coming in at A, and that, again, the synergy thing is preventing me from putting it up into the S tier here. Fury Warrior. Fury Warrior's got a lot of builds right here. Fury Warrior's doing a lot better performance-wise than Arms Warrior, both inconsistent. Well, definitely inconsistent damage. I'd say burst damage is maybe a bit lacking. I really love the return of Odin's Fury, but it doesn't have like that cut through immediate, like, oh, chunk in somebody's health bar and that sudden twitch reaction. It doesn't have that. You have a huge amount of healing though with Battle Trance that Arms Warrior doesn't have. That's scaling off that 40% stamina, and you do have Slaughterhouse, which is a 40% reduction in healing that you can apply to the target through your Rampage, and this is really good for making consistent damage matter when stamina pools are so high. This is probably one of the main driving factors for it being so good. I'm very tempted to put it onto S tier at the moment. There's something else to take into consideration, is that some specs might have talents and builds that people haven't discovered that could make them really good, because there's a lot of talents, there's a lot of things still to be uncovered. I think I just recently saw something like that might be redeeming Frost Mage a bit because it was really doing poorly, and then, oh, whoa, there's actually a new tier. I felt the same way about Balance Druid as well. I've been in and out of finding builds for it, so there's possibility for this to change. This is my best assessment that I can give you with the information I have at this time, and I've cross-analyzed it with a lot of other players and their thoughts as well to try and make sure it's as accurate as it can be in this state. So I'm honestly pretty tempted to put this on S. If not, it's the best A, because it's highly synergized. It can work with pretty much anything in the game. The only real problem comparatively to something like Feral would be that it can't heal its teammates, and it doesn't really have spammable crowd control to assist its teammates, which is going to be really important in ranked solo queue. But it's got high synergy, functions well in the meta currently, really good survivability, decent consistent damage, and Slaughterhouse is really powerful. So like I am edging it, kind of like I want it to go into S tier. Demon Hunter, this is very easy. Having Demon Hunter has so many build options that you can run with it that are all insanely crazy, with Essence Break, the Hunt burst damage, Soul Rend sustain damage through Throw Glaive. You have every crowd control diminishing return now because you have the Sigil that fears from Vengeance. You have stuns, you have incapacitates, you have team raid cooldowns like Darkness to keep them alive, tons of personal defensive cooldowns to stay aggressive, and Fodder to the Flames when you kill a demon. It basically is lay on hands. So if you're getting good demon procs, you're going to be doing huge damage and just healing yourself to full spontaneously at any given moment. Your leech healing is extraordinary. This spec is above and beyond the best spec. Like if I had to predict at the moment, if you were going to see the top ranked solo queue ladder, it's probably 4 evokers in a lobby at the highest rating. It's absolutely bonkers at the moment. It's benefiting greatly from all of the changes. Because it's going to function well in a sustained damage meta because it does high damage, and it just also has really high burst as well with Essence Break and the Hunt. It is a strong spec. Outlaw Rogue, this one is a tough cookie for me. It does not have burst damage. I tried to make it have burst damage. I tried running a Shadow Dance ambush build. I cannot get this spec's burst damage even close to like even the moderate classes in terms of burst damage. You do have comparable sustain damage. Like you'll do it on a scoreboard, you'll end up, you know, around basically every other spec, and you are bordering invincibility, much the same as in Shadowlands. So I do think that it could work. I don't think that it's as terrible as Arms Warrior, for example, just for that reason, because you are just so durable with the reduced cooldowns on evasions and stuff like that. Feint did receive a little bit of a hit, but I think it is still powerful. For me, I think it's probably middle, maybe bottom of the middle, maybe bordering somewhere here, like cusping almost into C. Need to see more of it, honestly. I'm not super excited about the spec. In PvP, it's missing that edge that I think rogue specs need to have, where it can like push someone over in a stun, and it's just not hitting that point. It's more or less almost like a tank spec. It just annoys people, gouges and kidneys, and runs around while it can't die. But again, that's a powerful way to compete in PvP. So that's definitely holding it up a little bit higher, I think, than I've seen some other players giving it as an assessment. Ret Paladin, it's really hit or miss, because sometimes I've seen this spec cracking skulls like it's Shadowlands, one-shotting people. It's a burst-based spec, so that 40% stamina increase definitely lowered it down a few pegs in overall competitive play. Still has really good healing with Word of Glory. Still big damage with Final Verdict. I've seen a little bit of shifts into the talent that does more damage when stunned, because it costs less holy power now. So this is a spec that maybe the talents haven't always all been discovered. Unfortunately, I feel like half your talents are being memed into consecration, which is not like, if they tried to force the consecration build to be good in PvP, I don't even know what would happen to PvP, but it would not be pleasant. So honestly, it's kind of hard to say. I feel like it's probably middle, because it can still crack skulls, still one shot, similar to Enhancement. Probably has better synergy than Enhancement, I would say, with other classes. So it's going to come up a bit higher. Do note that if you're on the left here on a tier, you guys can't see my mouse cursor for some reason. But if you're on the left here where the little Ret Pally is, that means you're the best on B tier, right? So Fury is the best A tier, Ret is the best B tier, right? And then Outlaw towards the end. And that's how you'd want to organize it. These are not all equal. Left means better than the one on the right. Subtlety Rogue, this is again a spec that relies on burst damage, so the stamina increase is going to be really rough. And a lot of the specs that are good, like Demonology Warlock particularly, are really good at shutting you down, completely removing your offense. And if there's any gaps in synergy with this specialization, you're going to have a tough time executing on wins, especially at lower ratings. You do have a lot of self-healing with 2 charges of Vanish and talents that make your Vanish heal for 30% of your health, so you're a little bit less squishy than you were in previous expansions on Subtlety Rogue. You're going to notice, I think, getting pulled out of stealth a little bit more than you did in Shadowlands with some of the conduits no longer carrying forward. But Sub Rogue, again, it's like a highly synergized spec, does really well with burst classes, things like Fire Mage and MM Hunter, and those specs are not performing too hot at the moment. So your synergy specs aren't there, and then your synergy with other classes is pretty low. You don't really have a sustained damage build to be able to compete with the other classes in sustained damage. If you're like the best Sub Rogue in the world, you can probably make it work. I would say that its kill pressure is probably higher than Arms Warrior. Defense is maybe close to the same, and you have more crowd control. So I'm putting it a bit above Arms Warrior for that reason. But you would definitely, you'll struggle either way with these. This could be really debated as to where they should be. Survival Hunter, I've been watching some hunters not doing too well. I've played BM Hunter. I had a lot of fun with it. Main reason is that you're like a glass cannon that's going to shatter very easily. Like these guys are just durability, just tanks, right? Like you're going to be fragile. The crowd control that you're based around can be broken by your teammates with AoE. And again, we got all these culprits up here that just love doing AoE damage in their rotation. So it may be really tough to make survival work. Survival's probably the best spec. Overall, your damage is going to still look decent on the scoreboard. All right burst damage, I'd say it's like moderate. It's not excessive. It's not going to be hitting Death Knight level or Demon Hunter level or Ret Pally level. So it's probably like maybe here somewhere, bordering in between here. Maybe it's better than Outlaw Rogue. I kind of want to say that it's better than Outlaw Rogue, but maybe not. I'll leave it here for now. Again, this might be a build as discovered kind of spec and it pops up later, or again, if we see some changes. Unholy Death Knight, this is a spec that I think is in the S tier at the moment, does a tremendous wave of burst damage. Like your Abomination Limb Go from Shadowlands just got amplified so much with a Gargoyle and empowering all of your legions of demons, and Will of Necropolis keeping you alive, the tank talents coming from blood being available to you, Death Strike percentage-based healing, scaling. You're going to be in a really good spot. I think, again, for you, your main problem could be that you don't have Mortal Strike, whereas Havoc Demon Hunter does. And the kind of immediate like burst damage that Havoc can do with the Hunt, like you'll ramp and overwhelm somebody, but it's not going to be that immediate knee-jerk reaction that's really important for kind of cheesing kills in a lot of situations. But it's definitely a strong spec. I think it synergizes really well in a sustained damage meta as well because of stamina being so high, pairing up with warlocks, pairing up with demon hunters, pairing up with fury warriors, this type of deal. I think that you're going to have an extraordinary time on it at the moment. Now Windwalker is playing very similarly to it as it has in cap, leg sweep, big burst damage, all right sustain, like middle ground, like you'll be okay on the scoreboard. You ain't gonna be up with the Aflocks, you're not gonna be up with the Havoc Demon Hunters. Your defense relies on mobility, which could be problematic in solo queue, because if you're porting away to escape the fight and your healer doesn't know that, you're in weird positions, and then your healer gets caught somewhere, it could be tough to survive. You're not going to be kind of brute forcing your way through a lot of battles as successfully as these other melee DPS specs can in those situations. You still do have a huge amount of burst damage, lots of modifiers on Rising Sun Kick, lots of modifiers on Blackout Kick, just amplifying that already existing archetype for the Windwalker in terms of burst damage. So for me, it's probably somewhere close to where Ret Pally is, where it can bomb. Maybe it's a bit higher. I feel like it's got to be a bit higher. I want to put it here. At the moment, it can definitely cut through some of the highest defense that I've seen in the game. Cheese kills with Strike of the Windlord, returning from Legion. I think it's a little bit better than Ret Paladin, and given the fact that it has way more mobility and a lot of the healing tools that Mistweaver had, it actually now has to help itself out or help its teammates out. But it's definitely not in the S tier category because it's not invincible. That's like the main thing. I'm very tempted to slide Fury up here, but for now, I think that this will be my assessment for Dragonflight, the melee DPS PvP tier list aimed at solo queue with taking in some 3v3 into account as well. We'll have to wait and see for the PvP Play with the Blues test that's going on this weekend. I think that that's where maybe this list shifts up a bit, and this is going to be the big opportunity to see what's going to happen and what's going to go on with Dragonflight PvP. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be great? Is it going to be a flop? So I'm very excited for that wave of testing this weekend. I do hope you enjoyed this video. It's given you a better idea of how the meta is shaping up, the specializations are shaping up, to give you a better idea of what you should be trying to go for. Personally, do you want to take a challenge with one of these specs to try and make them work, or are you just going to be flavor of the month re-rolling up here to the top? And again, this list could shift, but I think this is a fair assessment of the specs at this given time. So thank you very much for watching the video, and I will catch you in the next one.